Raise your hand if you speak English again. Raise your hand if you speak Spanish. Raise your hand if you speak another language besides Spanish or English. Raise your hand if you speak Tagalog. Raise your hand if you speak Urdu. Raise your hand if you speak Korean. Raise your hand if you speak some other language that I haven't mentioned. Raise your hand if you speak Dutch. Raise your hand if you speak German. Raise your hand if you speak sign language. Tell me another language I haven't listed yet that you speak. What do you speak? Hebrew. Raise your hand if you speak Hebrew. What's another language that I haven't said? Yeah. Another language. What else? Yeah. Japanese. Raise your hand if you speak Japanese. What was the other one? You. Yeah. You.
Gibberish.
Gibberish. Raise your hand if you speak gibberish. All right. Well, I wrote down that story that my grandmother told me in my journal. How many people have a grandparent who's ever told you a story? How many people have a grandparent that have told you jokes? Or scary stories? Or something that happened to them when they were younger? I didn't write my grandmother's story in this journal, but whenever I hear people tell me stories, I write them down. I wrote my grandmother's story in my journal, and I tried to get it published. And this is the story of how I tried to get it published. 6 years ago, I met an author of a book that I love. His name is Juan Felipe Herrera. The book is called The Upside Down Boy. And when I read that book, I was so amazed that I mailed Juan Felipe Herrera a letter, and he answered it. Turns out I was telling stories near where he lived, and he came and heard me tell stories, and he said, Antonio, I love your stories. I said, Mr. Felipe, I love your stories. He said, you should try to get your stories published. I said, how? He said, all you need to do is take one of your stories, mail it out to a bunch of publishers, and wait. I said, that's all I have to do? He said, that's all you have to do. Where do I find their addresses? He said, your librarian will help you. I went to my local library. My librarian gave me a list of 200 publishers that publish books for children. And I wrote out the story that my grandmother told me, The Barking Mouse. I mailed it out to 200 publishers, and I waited. It took a long time, about 5 months, before I got my first letter. It was a letter from a big publishing house in New York City. I was so excited. I ripped open the letter. It said, Dear Antonio, we loved your story, The Barking Mouse. They loved my story. However, we're not going to publish it. They didn't say why. They just said no. The next week, I got a letter from a big publishing house in San Francisco, California. Wow, I opened up the letter. Dear Antonio, your story was so funny. They thought it was funny. However, we're not going to publish it. The next week, I got a letter from a publisher in Chicago. Dear Antonio, we really didn't like the story at all. Please never send us anything again. The next week, I got 5 letters. The first one was very nice, but basically said no. The second one was kind of mean and said no. The third was just my story with a red stamp on it that said no. The fourth one said no, and you smell bad. The fifth said no. It didn't say that about smelling bad, but everybody told me no. I called Juan Felipe Herrera on the phone. I said, Juan, everybody's telling me no. That's good. What do you mean that's good? He said, every no letter you get brings you 1 letter closer to the people who might say yes. But they might all say no. And he hung up the phone. The next week, I got 10 letters in the mail. The first one said no. The second letter said no. Third, no. 4, no. 5, no. 6, no. 7, no. 8, no. 9, no. But the 10th letter I opened that day. Do you know what it said? No. Of the 200 letters I sent out, I opened up 195 no letters. The 196th letter that I opened didn't say no, and it didn't say yes. It said maybe. It asked if I would rewrite the story and make it longer and sillier. Well, you know I love to write in my journal, so I loved that assignment. I rewrote the story, made it longer and sillier. I sent it to them. They wrote me back. They said, that's great. Would you rewrite it again? So I rewrote it again. They wanted it even longer and even sillier. And then I added in the smooch. Ew. They said, that's great. Would you rewrite it again? How many people have ever had to rewrite something for something you handed in? How many people have had to rewrite something more than twice for a teacher? More than 3 times? How many people have had to rewrite something 5 times? How many people would, I had to rewrite my story 6 times. How many people would rewrite a story 6 times if a publisher asked you to do it? How many people would do it if they gave you a $5,000 advance to do it? I didn't get a $5,000 advance, but I rewrote that story 6 times. And after 195 no's, 1 maybe, 6 rewrites, do you know what I finally heard? Yes. I finally heard yes. And I couldn't believe it. They sent that story to an illustrator who lives in Mexico City. And he illustrated what the family of mice looked like. And they said, would you do it again? And he did it again, and they said, would you do it again? He had to redraw that family 5 times. They finally took his pictures and my words and put them together, and then a year after that, the book came out. And here it is. This is the barking mouse. That's the story I just told you. It was in a journal. Every day I write in my journal. And then I sent it out to a bunch of places, and it finally came out. I'm just going to show you 1 or 2 pictures. Here is the family. The illustrator's name is Alfredo Aguirre. There's Papa with his big muscles. Here is Mama and Papa smooching. Now the illustrator, Alfredo, made the cat look like a tiger. I want to show you the cat. Let me see, where is it? The cat is right there. It doesn't look like Hobbs. Maybe it looks like Hobbs a little bit. And here's the cat getting closer. They're the big green eyes of the cat. It's my favorite page, this one right here. Mama barking at the cat. Se cayó un balón. And then the last page I want to read to you. And when they all got home nice and safe, Mama said, you see, kids, es muy importante hablar otro idioma. It pays to speak another language. So if you speak Chinese or Dutch or German or French or sign language or English or any of the other languages, that's what it is. And that's the story of how, after 195 no's, I heard 1 yes.